I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like live right here on Black Power Media. I'm Jared Ball, joined by my man, Brother Kaba, the soul singer. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. How you feeling, brother?
I'm as good as could be expected. Greetings to everybody out there joining us, and welcome. Definitely, yes, indeed. Good morning. Good morning. Definitely reach out and, like the ear doctor says, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. Welcome, Tito District. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you for your membership. And please do, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, the join button, the bell, all of that stuff, so you don't miss when folks go live, when new programs are uploaded, etc. and so forth. And we definitely thank you for your support as we continue to do peace, Africans, indeed.
Peace, everybody.
Soda, indeed. Solidarity of dispersed or distributed or diasporic Africans, no doubt. Definitely had a good
much
time.
better than pop.
No question.
You should say soda anyway over pop, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Soda over pop, and backwards never, as is also said. And yeah, definitely thank you, Leah, and shout out to Doctors Konadu and Curry for last night's discussion. Woo! Joint was fire. Please go check that out. Shout out to the Black Lash Collective. Yeah, it was great. And what for me was, it was other than the production side was in many ways almost a night off, because Kwesi Konadu came through and not only I think had a fresher read of the book, but his perspective and knowledge base is so much different and more expansive than mine, so that he was able to bring to the conversation a lot of questions, particularly from the African continental perspective, given all his work there. He knew a lot of the scholarship firsthand that Curry was making reference to. Absolutely, he understood the assignment. And he was thoroughly prepared. Yeah, he was thoroughly prepared. And then he just has a different perspective. So he was able to raise questions that I certainly wouldn't have raised. And so the discussion was fantastic. Rich. I'm getting a little bit of an echo from you. I don't know if that's, I think that's from you. That is. I'm just muting you real quick. I think that is. But so anyway, we encourage people to go check that out. If you have read Curry's work, certainly if you haven't, you should go read it. But whether you've read it or not, I think again that conversation will be very different than even a reading of the book might have offered. Certainly, it's different from what a lot of I think Curry's other interviews and discussions have been like. So definitely, please go check that out.
The fact that he had to go all the way to Scotland, I didn't see the discussion, but the fact that he had to go all the way to Scotland to be a professor is pretty interesting.
So he did. We didn't get into this on the air, but he did. We ended up talking a little bit afterwards, and I think I don't think I'm overstepping any bounds here. I think one thing he would have wanted to make clear is that he because there is this because I even joked about it. He wasn't sort of run out of the country, so to speak. he got he had offers to stay here. He just felt that the trauma that they experienced, getting all the backlash down there in Texas, was just like, you know what, I'm gonna take a break. You know, he got a nice offer and a nice and I don't know anything about the money, but just an offer to be able to build a sort of wing of study is got to be you know. So
but I still think that
he's
speaks volumes, because he saw that as a better option than staying here. Yeah, that's what I mean.
I think he would not have agreed that he got chased out.
That's a different it's a nuance.
But to your point, absolutely. I mean, it's ridiculous that for whatever reason he was not made comfortable here, and is you know, most comfortable doing this work in Scotland. You know what I mean? It's, of all places. So anyway,
and I mean, in academia, you know, I thought that you know, differences of opinion, that debate were welcome. I thought that was even if you have a disagreement, if somebody has a cogent argument, whether or not you agree with it, they present a cogent argument. I think that should be engaged. At least that's what I thought academia was supposed to be about. That's what I thought. But I could be naive.
I was certainly naive, even within certain ranges. I mean, I was, you know, naive. Because I even thought within certain ranges, I didn't expect maybe the fantasy, but I just couldn't, you know. So it's been, you know, so I'm not surprised, but it is unfortunate, and what he had to go through, and what many in academia go through. I mean, and again, folks, I am still building my HBCU project, which is for lack of a better way of putting it right now, the untold stories of academic life. So if you know anybody, or you yourself experienced HBCUs as a student, staff, faculty, administrator, feel free to contact me.
Man,
building,
I forgot about that, man. I got some stories for you.
I'm sure you do, and I want them all. So we have to just set up an interview offline, because I am offering anonymity where people want, and then before anything goes public, everybody will get a chance to review it so that nobody is caught off guard. Because I do want these stories, and even anonymously, the stories are wild. I mean, what people have gone through. I started doing it almost as therapy for me, you know, just to get my own story off my chest. But the therapy is in that I almost am ashamed to have complained at all, given some of the stories I've heard from others. You know, it's like, how dare I? It's like, damn. It's like, so anyway. But so look, man, so at 9 o'clock, we have Professor Arun Kundani coming on to talk about, and I think we can expand this a little bit, given where I'd like us to start, or get to at least a little bit in the first half, given his work on the Muslim world. But specifically, Kundani is coming here to talk with us about recent interviews he's been able to conduct with Jamil Al-Amin, formerly known as H. Brown, something not easily done. And we definitely want to hear whatever he has to share. And hopefully there is something that we can do to help out, because obviously what has gone on with Jamil Al-Amin is crazy. I have a short video we're going to play later on in the show to set that up, that summarizes what has gone on, that features his own son. And I mean, anyway, it's just, again, unfortunately logical, given how the society is set up and run, and given the positions that he took and what he represents. But it's you know, I'd like us, you know, but I do want, I know you had something you wanted us to get to, which I think is fascinating and also somewhat relevant, and fits with this, and maybe we can start there. But I definitely wanted us to talk a little bit about roosting chickens and this anniversary of 9/11 that is tomorrow. But so if you want, I'll if you don't mind, we can start with what you had for us, and I'll pull it up and you can set it up and we'll go.
Well, in a tangential way, when we talk about 9/11, we're talking about a particular narrative, and that's kind of a broader, example of, what's being done here in this particular situation. Of course, we talked about Malcolm X and the narrative around him and how they could not, defame him. They could not defang him in life or even in death, in martyrdom. But what happened was the power structure started to try to change the narrative around Malcolm about who he was. And so similarly, we're seeing the same. And of course, we've seen several books, and you even wrote a book or edited a book and also contributed to a book about that, which was excellent. That is still worth reading. And I think even though it's about Malcolm X, I think it's worth reading when we talk about any of our heroes and sheroes that go before, because the same playbook is drawn from and used and revised and edited and regurgitated very often. And so such is the case also with Muhammad Ali. Now we can say that pretty much happened even during his lifetime, as he was, somewhat muted by his disease that he had for a long time, Parkinson's. Many people believe was brought on by his boxing. That's debatable. It could have been, or it could have just been exacerbated by it. But nonetheless, he was such a powerful figure, always among, if not among the most popular people on the planet. And so he was an inspiration for not just people here, but all over the world, including the Muslim world, which we'll get into a little bit later. And he influenced so many people. I can remember being a young boy, 2-3 years old, when that film, the documentary The Greatest, came out, and my father watching that. I was watching that with my dad, and my dad him and Muhammad Ali about the same age, but he just loved Muhammad Ali. And I remember as a young child, like seeds being planted, with him talking about the Vietnam War and about why should I go fight somebody across the world and my enemy's right here. I can remember that as a youngster, and that had an indelible impact on me. Even that in that film, so it really showed a more raw, a more accurate, issues notwithstanding, a more accurate depiction of Muhammad Ali. And so that particular depiction over time, of course, this is 1975. He was still, somewhat at the height of his fame. And after he had his illness, of course, it kind of went down from there. And then along with that also went the retelling of the story, the waving of the little American flag at the Olympics in '96 in Atlanta.
That's still hard to see, man.
And all of that. Yeah, and so I think this piece here with Ken Burns, who is an excellent filmmaker, he makes great films. Like to your point that you often make, it's not that you like the message, but you got to give it up to the.
They know what they're doing, man.
I mean, Jay-Z, you might not like all the stuff that he says, but you can't deny the fact that the man is ill, like one of the illest ever. The fact that he don't even write the stuff down, he just come in there and spit it one take and he's out. That's like amazing. As an artist, I can tell you that ain't your average garden variety type of thing to do. I can just tell you that. And any artist who's honest will tell you that ain't that's to be looked up and appreciated. So,
man, I can't even read my own commentary into a microphone in one take recording and get it right. Never mind not write it and get it right in one take.
Yeah, I mean, and so that's amazing, man. So Burns, likewise, as a filmmaker, he's kind of like the Jay-Z of filmmakers, if you want to go that far. That's wow. I don't know if he does it all in one take.
I wonder if Jay-Z how he feels about that.
He'd probably be honored. He probably give him a Tiffany diamond or something, or give him a Basquiat or some shit. But this retelling of Ali's story now, he's saying that he's signified by love, and he's not talking about the love of the type that Shay was talking about, revolutionary love. He's talking about this kind of altruistic agape love. You know, he was, and that was why he was so important. That was why he was so loved, was just this whole concept, this neutered type of love, this neutered type of agape love. And he's saying that was his most secret weapon, when in fact, no, his politics was why he was most popular. If he was just talking some love message, you know, he would have just been another preacher. He would have been a Vander Holyfield, or, you know, somebody like that, who was a great boxer. But I mean, he's talking this universal love, and we all should be this and that. He would have been, you know, what was the guy that he beat, that one boxer that they brought out to beat him, to fight him, and he beat him up. And what's my name? And Floyd Patterson. He would have been like Floyd Patterson.
Yeah,
he'd have been Floyd Patterson. Yeah. You know, so, you know, I just think this retelling of the story is being done again, and they always try to do that with people whose most powerful messages are they're too strong to just totally ignore. So you got to try to reshape it and remix. You got to remix it. This is the remix, you know. So that's what tends to happen in these cases, and I think we need to be careful, even as we watch it. And I will watch it, and it was, you know, it'll probably be well made. We can't be deceived into believing that this is actual true and proper narrative of Muhammad Ali.
Well, you know, when I saw that you wanted to, and I do hear that echo, man. I
don't hear it.
I mean, it may be just me, but anyway, when I saw that you wanted to talk about this, I tried to find it but I couldn't. But one of the there were only a handful of papers that I wrote in grad school that I really thought were something. And one of them was actually about documentary film, and it centered on Ken Burns, who at the time, this is, you know, 20 years ago already, but at the time he was sort of just becoming anointed as the PBS guy, you know, the number one guy, and he had done the joint on jazz, and which I remember Dr. Turner at Africana had already torn to pieces, and he's and I forgot, but he told the story of was it Benny Goodman, one of the famous Jews in jazz, when
King of Swing,
something like, but had gone up to Harlem and gotten into some band battle with one of the brothers, and I can't even remember who it was. Turner told the story, but he was like, this guy was the guy that Ken Burns was saying was like the this and the that. So Turner was using it as an example to say, but this guy got smoked when he came up to Harlem and tried to do his thing in the community. But the point I'm getting at is that in the paper though itself, I was just reading all this work on documentary film, and there was this one article in particular that I remember that talked about Ken Burns in terms of in the documentary he did on Lewis and Clark. And where she really, and this was what I wanted to find my paper for, to find, because I don't remember the name or any of many of the relevant details, but the crux of it is that Burns was brought in because, not just because of his talent, which is you know, is undeniable, but is that he has skill with editing, whatever, but in storytelling even, but it's the narrative that he wanted to put on it, and that in a very nuanced and sophisticated and smooth way, you just get a lot of Americana, you get a lot of the manifest destiny, you get a lot of the myth of origin that this country needs and relies on, so and anyway, so I was not surprised to see him coming back again. I mean, I remember I watched his Central Park 5 documentary, and would have loved to seen that again more recently, but for the details on that. But even in that, there were just subtle ways that he reminds you that whatever has gone wrong has still gone wrong in the best place possible, and that we're headed in some sort of corrective direction. So
It's
anyway,
like
it makes
Bill
sense.
Maher said something like that. You know, he was talking about America, and people were pointing out all of the issues with Afghanistan to pull out, and the issues with America. And he made some kind of commentary recently about, well, America, well, despite all its faults, America's still the best, and this and that. And, yeah, and Jimmy Dore, I actually saw Jimmy Dore just tore that apart. You know, he just basically went back, and he also showed this clip of Glenn Greenwald years ago, just destroying him on the show. And he said ever since then he hadn't had Glenn Greenwald or anybody to his left back on that particular program. So it's that same. Now he does it in a more, you know, in your face way, but to your point, and I think even more egregiously, Burns, because he comes off as a nice guy, he comes off as a guy who appreciates our music, you know, and he's an excellent filmmaker and a storyteller. You know, it will go unnoticed. The dig will go unnoticed. And going back to Malcolm, this is one of the things that Malcolm taught me. You know, you talk about all these people taught me, even though you do other things outside of what they taught you. But what Malcolm taught us is that the fox is more dangerous than the wolf. You know, even though ironically the fox is now looked at on the right when it comes to media and so forth. But that's a whole nother discussion. But I think that's the most important piece is that documentary is taken seriously. You know, and they should be in many cases. And so it's not looked at as entertainment pieces, looked at as, you know, information. Go ahead.
That was actually the point. I'm glad. Thank you, because that was really the point I forgot that I wanted to get to. That in that research I was talking about for that paper, that was a lot of what was being said about documentary filmmaking. That it's presented as authoritative history, and people are lulled into a false sense that what they're getting is actual history. But what it is, it's no different than any other film or any other media product, in that it's loaded with bias, loaded with propaganda, worldview, all of that stuff. But because it's presented in that way, it's the same thing that gives people that false sense of, you know, it was like I even I can't remember anything, but there were a couple of interesting commentaries around even the show Fargo when it first came out, coming off of the film Fargo, that simply because of the phrase that they show at the beginning, based on a true story or inspired by a true story. And with Fargo, that was entirely fiction and done for effect, but intentionally. But in general, when that's shown on the screen, people are lulled, even in a standard Hollywood product, are lulled into a false sense of, oh, this is about to have at least some reality in it, and it may have barely the sketch of authentic, you know, of the experience. So that's why it's like, so when it comes with a documentary label and then a Ken Burns documentary label, it's
yeah. I mean, it's like the juice. It's made with 100% real juice, and that might be true. But then you throw in all the other crap in it, and it just dilutes it. It's like saying crack is made with 100% real cocaine. Well, yeah, it is.
That's right.
But then it's diluted with a whole baking soda and a whole bunch of other stuff that makes it even more addictive and worse, you know, for your health down the line. So, you know, it's deceptive. It's deceptive labeling, and these people do this very well. This is why we're in the situation we're in right now, because capitalism will confuse you.
Absolutely. So speaking of capitalism confusing you, I want. Let's take a quick and run through this in 30 minutes and try to do this in 30 minutes. A quick shift and a comeback, and then let's talk about 9/11 real quick, at least for a few minutes. Something easy, a easy light topic to get into for a short period of time. Hold on a second. I mix what I like. So you and I have never had this discussion, private or publicly. So I don't know. I almost don't know anything. I might guess or speculate, but I almost know nothing of what you think of 9/11, of what happened. I don't know your particular story. You know where you were, or even if you were alive. You look like such a young man. I'm not even.
Yeah, sure, you're right.
But but what is compelling to me, there are two things that I wanted to raise this morning with us. One, that I have been very moved ever since I was introduced to these folks by the arguments of the very white and admittedly led by conservative and right wing uh, architects and engineers for 9/11 truth.
Mm-hmm.
I've been very compelled by their argument because it's science based and it's only asking questions about how did these towers fall and the arguments around that. They don't get into, at least as far as I'm aware. I could speculate again with where I might go for them, but they don't go into who did it or why. They just are focused on the science of the three towers coming
Mm-hmm.
down. And I would like to show a clip from one of their documentaries, and admittedly not the most exciting one, but for me, one of the most compelling for reasons I'll get to in a minute. The other track is the political track, and the roosting, specifically the roosting chickens argument from Ward Churchill, activist and scholar of indigenous background and focus for the most part. And what he had said that was interpreted or misinterpreted or reinterpreted regarding little Eichmanns. All right. So that's it. So there are the two video clips I'd like to share, one from each of those particular arguments or perspectives or discussion areas, and then you know, we'll slide into 9 o'clock. But before we do that, I did want to ask you, you know, what if any are your thoughts on the subject, or if you have a story about where you were on 9/11. Because for whatever we think about it, it's hard to deny what an impact it had for those of us who were around, and for all of us since.
Well, first of all, I am a young man. I don't look like a young man. I mean, I am a young man.
Right on, right on.
Let's get that out of the way.
All right, thank you.
Secondly, yeah, I was at work, man, and I saw it. I was at this media company, and I saw it, and you know, I saw the first plane, and then when we saw the second plane, we knew that it was a game changer. You know, as far as the construction and how it went down, I'll say this. I'm not a structural expert or anything like that. We talk a lot about our time in the military, and you talked about some of the things that you did, your job, your MOS, as they call it, which is your job, basically, in the military. Mine had to do with working with jet fuel, more specifically helicopter fuel, because that's mainly what I worked with. And we used JP5, which is a form of fuel. It has a very low flash point, which means it's not very flammable. Most jet fuel or fuel that is used for aircraft obviously is not the same as you would use as a fuel that we mostly use for cars. So, and obviously because the engines run hot, you don't want the thing to blow up, right? So the fuel that's used for aircraft is specifically designed to have a low flash point, meaning it is not very flammable at all. As a matter of fact, I can remember us trying to, have like barbecues and stuff, and we would laugh trying to use the fuel to light the barbecue, and it would never work because it's very hard to light. So it has a low flash point. Now that was just helicopters. Now planes have even higher flash point, which means that it's even less flammable than helicopters, because planes obviously have bigger engines most of the time, especially a big jumbo jet. So they're going to have a lower flash point because you don't want to have, of course, explosions. So that being said, when I heard that the planes flew into the building and that the explosion caused the building to melt that steel, right then my eyebrows went up, because I knew that the fire, of course, it would have started a fire because it was an explosion, but the fire would not have been so intense as to melt steel. The steel is extremely hard. I mean, that it's forged in heat, so it actually will intensify in heat. I know that much. I mean, anybody who's been around steel, at least to some extent, knows that it's going to get harder. That's how it's formed in the first place. It's forged in steel. It's forged in fire. Forged by fire. That's the whole point. You make a sword, building. That's what it is. So when I saw that these planes, which have a very, I think I said high flash point, it has a low flash point. Low flash point means it's not flammable. I have a low flash point burning this steel. I automatically knew that that was impossible, just as a person who worked with fuel. When I saw these documentaries that you're talking about, because it's been a long time, I haven't seen them in probably a long time, like several years. But when I did see it, that resonated with me, just from their area of expertise, from my work experience with fuel. I knew that something was up with when I saw that. So I always questioned and never believed the official story. And then when you take into other variables, like, the fact that they went to Iraq, and I think 18 of the people, or 19 of them, were from Saudi Arabia, which happens to be an ally of America. Like, why would you invade Iraq? It's like if you punch, if I punch you in the face, you're not gonna go and punch some random dude, walking down the street. You're gonna come for me. That's just, it makes perfect sense. So with that and just other things, for me, I always question the original, the official story, but I'm inclined to do that anyway. But especially given that, and the fact that I know what little I do know about fuel, and then what I saw with these people who work in construction, and then just looking at construction sites, you always see that they always fall a certain way due to explosives. And if buildings do burn in other ways, it's not like that. It's going to burn mainly from the top down, or wherever the fire hit. And in this case, it was more towards the top. So it would have fallen a different way, and not from the bottom, which just seemed incredulous.
So listen, I'm going to show. I'm not going to show the whole thing, and I might even come back and do more of this on Monday. It depends, because I've reached out to a number of folks to see if they would come on. I haven't heard back from them, and it I don't know. It's just fascinating. Now, unfortunately, we can't reach out to this woman here because she passed away on November 22nd, 2011, actually not on just a few months after she gives this interview here. But who she is, for those who may not recognize her, is Dr. Lynn Margulis. And I'm skipping the part of the video where she actually gives you an overview of her background and the awards she's won. But she was all I could say. I don't know anything about it, but all I can say is she is a tremendously well respected and well regarded and awarded scientist. And she had also, in addition to her own career, she was the wife of Carl Sagan, who had his own very famous and illustrious scientific career. But to your point, Kaba, and let me just double check that I had the audio set. Check out what I forwarded it to where she is getting to the summary of her concerns. So she spends the first few minutes talking about who she is and her background, just so people knows that she's, legit or whatever. And then, and her interest is, again, the science. So let's just check this out real quick.
Made available for criticism by anyone who feels that they can criticize them. Okay, 3 buildings come down at almost the speed of free fall, which is the gravitational speed. And for 2 of them, it's because airplanes hit them. And for the 3rd one, it's a mysterious reason. That is, there's no really coherent hypothesis, except it's claimed that there are these fires in them. Now, the most obvious hypothesis for anyone looking at the films, and that was a lot of people, is that the buildings came down because there was very carefully controlled demolition with high explosives that had been planted many weeks, if not months before. The first thing they do is ignore, in all cases, the most obvious and reasonable hypothesis that is consistent with all other destructions in a very short time of buildings. And what is worse is that all of the evidence was removed. You can't do science without evidence. Unfortunately, there was a lot of evidence about the pieces that the columns were broken into, the nature of the uniform nature of the dust. But very quickly, if this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime, evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. Well, if evidence is removed, no scientist can possibly reconstruct what happened. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned, this is not science. So the claim is that it's something else. It's trying to prove preconceived ideas, not having data that they could use to make a model, but to prove a model that was unprecedented in the history of buildings collapsing. So we're not doing science here. We're not doing bad science. We're just not doing science at all, is my claim. So what, to me, is most impressive, since I do microscopic work all the time, are the many, many microscopic samples that show these extremely, totally unique red-gray crystals, red and gray in the same crystal, and it was found in all the dust samples. So the preconceived notion of NIST is that there's no evidence for explosives, and so there's no point in looking. That is the most unscientific thing that you can possibly think of, not to look because you don't expect to find evidence. And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red-gray crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries. And so they have a lot of evidence for something they have no explanation for. They don't even look at it. They ignore it completely, ignorant, and dismiss the explosive argument. And on the other hand, give an argument that's patently false, that no scientist will accept, that office fires, can bring buildings down at the speed roughly of gravity, of free fall. They state these conclusions for which there's virtually no evidence, and then they ignore conclusions that can be drawn from the evidence. This is not a scientific procedure at all.
So that's there's so much more, but I just I like that clip, and from this person in particular, because for a quick summary of what is of most interest to me, and I think central to them, is it's an example of their focus being on the science. They get into all of, if you go to their YouTube page, I've even seen the new documentary 7, which focuses on another engineer who recreates with his PhD students the models of Building 7. And I mean, the short story is that there is no scientific explanation for how the buildings all came down. The 2 that were hit by planes, the 1 that was not hit by a plane at all. The NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, that was commissioned by Congress to give the official scientific report, as she says there, ignores all this data, all this research. All of the scrap metal was within I think a few weeks after 9/11 was shipped off to China. So they and that's what she's talking about in terms of the evidence was removed. So they couldn't. So all that was left was a few pieces here and there, and then the dust. So, and when they analyzed the dust, as she's talking about there, which was uniform in terms of, well, let me not say uniform, but showed a lot of similarities in terms of what was found in it all over the place. Suggests, as she says there, that the likelihood was explosives. And then all these other pieces of evidence support the same thing, that for the buildings to fall straight down, they would have had to have the columns within destroyed. And to your point about steel, they get into all of that. And not only was it steel, but it was coated steel, flame retardant steel. So protected, as they say, steel. So that's why they've saying never before or since 9/11 have protected steel structures collapsed into their own footprint as a result of fire or being hit by a plane. They get into everything. Fires burn usually for 20 to 30 minutes. The jet fuel, to your point, they argue with great effect, at least for someone not an expert. But the science they lay out seems reasonable. They said that when the plane hit, the big fireball you see is basically all of the jet fuel exploding and flaming out. And then when they show you the footage of the towers coming down, what you see predominant is black smoke, meaning that the fire was on its way out. It was cooling because there was no more oxygen for it.
It has a low flash point. That's the whole point of it.
Exactly. And then even after that, even if they're burning for hours as they test in their own models, as opposed to the 20 or 30 minutes, which was even attested to by the NIST report, the fires don't burn long enough or hot enough to do the damage that is claimed or attributed to them. So before you get into any of the other, a lot of stuff, I remember the BBC reported that at least 6 of the so-called Saudi Arabian hijackers walked into embassies around the world, wherever they were, and claimed that their identities had been stolen and proved that they themselves were there, standing there, and weren't on the plane at all. So leaving many, at least for a time, to ask, we don't even know if that part of the narrative is accurate. But my point is, I mean, there's so much more. You know, the whole thing of Marvin Bush being in charge of security, the guy who was in, of the towers, the elevator company coming in weeks in advance, shutting the buildings down and working on the shafts. All that stuff is wild.
You just reminded me of something. Where I'm from, Sarasota, Florida, right? You remember that picture of Bush reading the book upside down in the class? That was in my elementary school. I went to that school.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't in the same location, but it's
and
the
you
same
weren't
school.
in that class that day. That wasn't your class.
I wasn't in kindergarten.
So young, man. I don't know, man. We don't know.
I'm young. Yeah. I was in the 2nd grade, I think.
You were down the hall.
Right. I mean, it was a big deal. They knew I was trouble back then. The Secret Service didn't even let me get close to that dude, man. And we born on the same day too, which is like, wow, you got my birthday.
Oh man. Wow.
But anyway, but also in Sarasota, Florida, the Bin Laden family lived in Sarasota, Florida. Not only that, they lived less than a mile away from that school at the time. Now, I'm sure all of that might be a coincidence. Well, at least I'm not saying the whole family, but some members of the Bin Laden family did live there. And the only people who were allowed to fly after 9/11 out of the United States were members of that family that flew out of Sarasota Bradenton Airport. They flew out of that airport, out of the United States. They were the only plane that was able to fly for a while after 9/11.
Yeah, it goes on and on and on. The FBI guy most interested in tracking bin Laden before 9/11 was reassigned to security to work in the towers the day before and reported his first day, I think, on 9/11. And was killed. So there's all kinds of funky things, but I am actually most interested in the scientific part, because I think it allows for, some focus and some clarity, and just some very interesting, and then separately as an issue of anybody who studies media or propaganda, I think it is interesting to note just how the narrative was developed, how it evolved, what happened since. And if you go back, and even as they show on their website, a lot of the early reports, people are reporting all over the place on national news and everywhere that they're hearing explosions, that they think there are bombs going off, that it's there's all kinds of stuff that they're reporting that slowly over time gets removed from the narrative and never spoken of again. Obviously, the one where the famous one where the woman is claiming Building 7 has collapsed while it's standing behind her on screen in advance of actually coming down. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. So that was one thing.
Let me just say this real quick. It just really shows you how intricate these lies can get with these people. Like these people, I mean, they try to cover everything. And it also shows you how whenever it is whenever it is convenient, they'll ignore all science and just totally just ignore all of the principles and the scientists, people coming forth. Because I think a lot of these people probably at first they were like, okay, well, these people just don't know this. Let's just present this information, because they just assumed that, you know, this is America and all we have to do is just show my expertise and blah, blah, blah. And what happened is they got ignored. And then they were like, well, wait a minute, what's going on? Okay, let's try it again. And they kept getting ignored. But the point is that whenever the power structure here in America want to advance a particular narrative, they're going to ignore all science, all research, and they're going to rely totally on fear and manipulating people's emotions in order to get the public behind them to do what it is that they wanted to do in the first place.
I mean, so I mean that's in fact Dr. Margulis on her Wikipedia page. I mean, she's described as having said that this was done as a false flag to justify invasions of the Middle East. Again, we could go on and on and on speculating about that, or debating that or whatever. But I just like the science part, and then I do like if let's go ahead and work this in real quick. Oh, by the way, because I think the other thing was that Spike Lee is supposed to have, and I think it drops today, or maybe it's up already, but the newest edition of his series on the epicenters of New York, or New York as the epicenters of whatever. He's supposed to interview members of the 9/11 Truth folks, because he's already been condemned for it. So the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth folks. So I'd like to see what he does with that, and how that comes out in the editing, and maybe I'll come back to that and revisit some more of this on Monday.
Yeah. Amy Goodman covered this, right? Didn't Amy Goodman cover the 9/11 Truthers?
I honestly don't know, man.
I'm being facetious.
Joking. I don't even know, man. Honestly, I don't.
He stays away from that. Even the left, even a lot of people on the so-called left stay away from it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this has always been a thing for, like people like Chomsky and others don't ever want to talk about this, and many other, like political assassinations and stuff like that. But
don't let Kamal hear that.
Yeah, don't tell Kamal. but I know I can't help but find it fascinating, and especially again, I can't, the scientific piece. I mean, it's incredibly it's just fascinating, but also again to see that not only how this has been used to justify political behavior,
and they found one of the guy's wallets too, and
the passport.
Yeah, I mean, they found his passport. Yeah, I mean that survived that survived all of that. So I mean, it's probably just another coincidence. Coincidences happen, man.
Yeah. So, but let me just play a clip of this piece from it's now what I would consider classic presentation in defense of his roosting chickens argument and book, War Churchill, where he talks about in this video, and we'll include the link, of course, on the justice of roosting chickens. That is the full title. But anyway, I just really like what he has to say here and how he puts this to use. And I'm going to let it run for at least a couple minutes, and then we'll get we'll transition to Jamil Al-Amin. But and maybe we'll just come back to this on Monday too, because there's just so much more. But anyway, check this out real quick, because I think this part, in addition to what we were just talking about, is important and fascinating.
But what are we on about actually? What was the substance of what was said that drove everybody up the wall? I made a comparison of what I called a technocratic core of empire to little Eichmanns. Eichmann. We all know the resonance of the name. Not very many people know very much about the man, what it was that he did. And the first wave of responses I got out of this was, this guy killed Jews. This is a Nazi. Killed Jews. Sorry, he didn't. Adolf Eichmann was brought to a court of law and prosecuted for his crimes in Israel, no less. With the survivors as witnesses, with the survivors of the victims as his prosecutors, and he was never accused of having killed anyone, Jewish or no. He arranged train schedules. He arranged the shipment of gas from the manufacturing facilities to the annihilation facilities. He arranged the transshipment of the gold pried out of the teeth and the eyeglasses and the clothing and the hair to be utilized in the German economy. He was a consummate organizational genius of a sort, I suppose. Entirely proficient, entirely competent, entirely, as Hannah Arendt put it, banal. As I say, whole book, one phrase. Why Eichmann? Well, I didn't actually say they were Eichmann. I said they were little Eichmanns. Because you see, there actually is a difference here. He was the guy in charge. He was the Gruppenführer. He was not this highly placed Nazi official that they make reference to. He was a colonel, which is a
And of course, he's talking about the
substantial
people in the
rank,
towers
not even a
that he's
general
referring,
office.
who were there the day.
He was an office manager.
Who were little Eichmanns.
Important office. It's true. But even in his own context, he was symbolic. Even there, because Eichmann couldn't even arrange the train schedules and the logistics of the Holocaust on his own. Eichmann symbolized all the lesser and unknown figures who worked under him in that bureau. He symbolized the technicians who manufactured the gas. He symbolized the guys in the locomotives who hauled the cars filled with human cargo, the managers in charge of the Buna plant, all those others who were only technicians doing their job in order to fill the proper niche as it was defined in the structure of the society that they inhabited, who turned a blind eye to the carnage they caused. Could not have happened without their performing of their functions in the manner they did. Good Germans, but good Germans of a particularly virulent sort, I would suppose. And that was the implication of the phrase, little Eichmann. And I drew some conclusions from that and took the reader along for the ride. Draw your own conclusions. Well, we'll take the ride, but the ride keeps evolving. Keeps evolving. We can localize it here.
I'm going to stop it there for now, just so I can quickly work in, for now at least, because his point, again, was that whatever we think of what happened on 9/11, the towers were themselves a military target. And that the people in those towers, specifically those working for the industries in them, not obviously he clarifies later, not the service staff, the janitorial staff, that's not who he was talking about. He was talking about the people that worked in the major, anyway. But in this piece here that came out in Counterpunch on September 3rd, revisiting 9/11, War, Churchill, and Those Little Eichmanns by Joshua Frank, there's a couple interesting points to that point that I just wanted to highlight here very quickly. And Frank writes here that in July of 2007, Ward Churchill was dismissed from his teaching position in the Ethnic Studies Department at the University of Colorado. While Colorado University administration attested that his ousting was due to scholarly fraud, Churchill argued it was most certainly not, and had much more to do with the controversial political writings on 9/11. Again, at the time, I did a deep dive into all the literature on that. I read a lot, if not all, a lot of the transcripts of the testimony and all the evidence and what was said to be evidence against Churchill and his scholarly activities and all of that. And it was a mess. And he was clearly not guilty of academic fraud. And the people that they were bringing to judge him were themselves fraudulent in their role. And he showed and exposed that they weren't qualified by academic background. Some of them had themselves been accused of plagiarism and the like. I mean, it was a whole mess. Derek Bell came to his defense and many others. So that was clearly not the issue. It was definitely in response to his politics. Yeah. If there was a better, more effective, or in fact, any other way of visiting some penalty befitting their participation upon the little Eichmanns inhabiting the sterile sanctuary of the Twin Towers, I'd really be interested in hearing it, wrote Churchill in his 2003 book on the justice of roosting chickens. Churchill's little Eichmanns was an obvious reference to Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem, in which she detailed the trial of Adolf Eichmann for his role in orchestrating the Holocaust, coining the phrase banality of evil. Eichmann, Arendt contended, was not particularly sinister or demented, but a thoughtless dupe in service of mass murder. He was simply carrying out orders, she contended, never weighing their moral implications. So that's what Churchill was saying about not only the people in the towers, but I would argue a lot, if not all of us, who function in this society on some level or another without adjusting it or ending its operation as it is. So anyway, but Churchill continues here. Churchill should have emboldened this little Eichmann argument in his original piece by pointing out that CIA offices were housed in the World Trade Center, along with a large office of cruise missile manufacturer Raytheon. He could have also stressed the terrorists likely attacked the World Trade Center in hopes of inflicting a massive fracture in the U.S. economy, the driving force behind the violent U.S. war machine. Instead, he left his readers to sit quietly on the little Eichmann's reference. So that was a critique of what he could have said, and did not add to bolster his initial claim. In fact, Churchill argued that these were not individual acts of terror unless you can actually also categorize U.S. military activity as terror. This is to say that since the assaults on the World Trade Center and Pentagon were an act of war, not terrorist incidents, they must be understood as components in a much broader strategy designed to achieve specific results, end quote. So I just wanted to make those quick points. And having heard Churchill and actually been present in one of his lectures where he made the point specifically that it would be historically and inaccurate, but inaccurate in terms of the origin of the term terrorism to define anyone attacking the World Trade Center, or certainly the accused Al-Qaeda folks, as terrorists, because the origins of the word, he said, came out of the French Revolution and was meant to describe what is done by the state to its citizens. That is, terrorism is what the state does to its citizens. So what in fact would have been occurring on 9/11 would have, by his definition, been a counter-terrorist attack, and a military one meant to, destroy the center, or hurt at least the center, or the source of much of that power, in addition to what happened in DC, the attacks there in DC on that same day. So anyway, we can come back to that, but I just wanted to quickly go there. Go ahead.
I'll just say real quick, it just is very much in the same way that they did with the native people. They called them savages, when in fact they were the ones who were savage. Just like with scalping, they say that that's what they did, but actually the natives were doing that, returning in kind what white people were doing to them. They were scalping the natives, and the natives in turn scalped their asses back. And then because they had the nerve to do that, all of a sudden they're savages, and they're attributed with this inhumane practice of scalping. So they always feel like anytime you fight back, they feel like they have the right to rule over you, to dominate you, to control you in any way possible, and that you have to sit back and take it and not fight back. I mean, this is the same Malcolm X King, kind of argument to a certain extent with the one that Malcolm was making. We're not talking about they always talk about violence. I was listening to a Malcolm interview last night, always talking about violence. No, we're talking about self-defense. But basically what you're implying is that I don't have the right to defend myself, that you have the right to do to me anything you want to, and that I should just shut up and take it. Hell no, we're not taking that at all. So to your point, yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, I mean,
And it's
so
kind of like what we're talking about with our next subject, because he was about self-defense as well, and he was also looked at as a terrorist. And they never forget. They never say that was in the past. They never say let get bygones be bygones, like they try to get us to do, and like some of us fall for. They have long memory, and they continue to come for them, just like they continue to come for Haiti for having the unmitigated gall to free themselves from terrorists.
So that's a perfect transition. So since our next guest, I don't see him here just yet, what we're going to do is take a quick transition break and run this clip I wanted to show, and we're going to call up our guest. We're going to evoke our guest to join us here in just a minute, but with this little bit of transition and prep. So thank you for that, Brother Kaba, and we'll be right back here at I Mix What I Like live on Black Power Media. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
See, it's no in between. You're either free or you're a slave. There's no such thing as second-class citizenship.
If we go to YouTube and search H. Rap Brown, I don't think there's anyone, I think his performance was unparalleled. After, he became Imam Jamil, we know the tremendous work that was done.
We seek refuge in Allah from a knowledge that is not useful, from a heart in which there is no remembrance, from a prayer that is unanswerable, from a tongue that is not truthful, and from a soul that is ungrateful.
I don't think we either know or we give the proper appreciation for the work that Imam Jamil, even before embracing Islam in 1971. Imam Jamil was one of the most fearless individuals that they had ever met. African-American men said that they found their manhood. They found how to express their manhood in the face of conflict because of the example and the words of Imam Jamil. The loss for almost the last 20 years that the Muslim community has suffered is a loss that has been, to a certain degree, suffered by the non-Muslim community as well. Even after this bogus conviction, he's still not able to publicly speak about the situation.
Now it's time to kind of scrub that clean and get him back to, the position of reverence that he deserves to be in, because he's done so much for us at this point as a ummah and as Black people. So they understand the power of his words, to move people to whatever action. That's the reason why he's in federal custody at this moment. It's because, they put the leader of the Aryan nation in a cell next to him, and they got to talking, and he took shahada. So,
that's true.
After that, they were like, okay, federal custody, solitary, we don't have time for this, and we can't let you speak to anybody. But they knew that, all the way back in the trial. So the current gag order is an unofficial gag order. Basically, it's just if you request an interview, they're going to say no. And the most pervasive thing in all of this is that since before day one of the trial, the guy who did it said, I did it.
That you had committed a murder and were involved in the shooting of a cop in March of 2000 in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
All right. You weren't arrested for it, were you?
No, sir, I was not.
In fact, another person was tried and convicted.
Jamil Al-Amin, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Throughout the trial, they cheated time and time again. And when I say cheated, I mean cheated. From faulty ballistics, the lady who did the ballistics in our trial, who was, hired by the state, she was fired from her job because she did faulty ballistics. And the ballistics don't match. The description matches the guy who confessed. They said the man who shot these police officers was wounded. The guy who confessed was wounded. My father wasn't wounded. And so then all of a sudden the blood from that was found on the scene, they couldn't find a match because it didn't match the imam. All the way to the constitutional violation. They violated his constitutional rights a few times, but the most prominent one was they did a mock cross-examination where they asked him questions in the closing argument and then answered the questions for him to the jury after he exercised his right not to testify, because we believe that they didn't present a strong enough case that warranted him to have to testify. We proved that he didn't do it. There's just so many things that happened in this one trial. I mean, we have all these other things listed out, and we want them to review that as well. But it's like, hey, look, this guy Otis Jackson, he's sitting in prison in Florida. He's telling you he did it. He's been telling you he did it. We have three affidavits from him. We have him on video. We have handwritten like every kind of confession you can possibly get from a guy, he gave us. So it's like, what do y'all want? Like, if nothing else, we deserve a new trial. But realistically, let the imam go. Like, let him go. Look, this isn't even in line with the man we know and love and have this respect for. If nothing else, he's told you he didn't do this.
And verily, man has been created into toil and struggle, that it is a part and parcel of the development that you encounter in this life, that you must struggle. So therefore, in this sense, the best struggle, the best way to be able to struggle deals with following the guidance.
Yes, indeed. And you can see there why he would be continuing, why he continues to be seen as a threat, and why we need to continue to raise him up and try to support those supporting him and see about getting him out. And as I said, Brother Kaba, our attempt was successful. Our guest has arrived, and I'm very much looking forward to this discussion with him. And I am talking about someone who says here is as an advisor to the UK government, described our next guest, Arun Kundani, as an imbecile who writes intellectually lazy, retarded, tribal, anti-establishment nonsense, end quote. The Times columnist David Aaronovitch has called him an idiot, and The Guardian has described him as one of Britain's best political writers. Kundani writes about racial capitalism. There. I was going to say, right? I was like, I like that.
Which one is it?
Maybe it's both, all three. Kundani writes about racial capitalism and Islamophobia, surveillance and political violence, and Black radical movements. He is the author of the Muslims Are Coming, Islamophobia, Extremism, and the Domestic War on Terror, and The End of Tolerance, Racism in the 21st Century, which was selected as New Statesman Book of the Year. He has written for The Nation, The Guardian, The Washington Post, Vice, The Intercept. Born in London, he moved to New York in 2010, a former editor of the journal Race and Class. He was miseducated at Cambridge University and holds a PhD from London Metropolitan University. He has been an Open Society Fellow and a scholar in residence at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York Public Library. Welcome, Arun, to the program. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Jared. You didn't have to read that whole thing out. That's the thing for trying to impress people, but I don't need to do that with you guys. I've been to the UK several times, and they usually are pretty laid back and kind of conservative when it comes to, they're not likely to be as abusive as some of this language was. I'm quite surprised. So for them to do that to you, that you must have really set them off pretty much. I mean, it's passive aggressive in Britain, right? It's like, oh, we're really polite to you, and we're really kind of, we don't come out with what we really think, but then we'll beat you over the head, like that's the British Empire, right? So I did some work in Britain, exposing some of the secret surveillance programs that were running there. And that annoyed some people, So they had a few years where I was getting targeted in that way by people with vested interests. But that's part of how it goes, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's a high honor to be.
Exactly. I take it as a badge of pride. If you're getting insulted by the right people, I take it as a badge of pride, right?
if we can, I might even, it's because in fact I was reading I think this is a 2016 article you co-wrote on crypto encryption and surveillance. I'd very much like to come back to that if we can today, if not maybe another time. I came to it indirectly, but I'm very interested in what you all were doing there. So and it relates to this obviously. So but as we heard in that clip there, by the way, in terms of your bio, I mean, the joint is funny, and I mean, you know, if you're gonna take shots at being miseducated at Cambridge and stuff like that, I got to at least get it in there one time. But anyway, but you know, we saw even in that clip that anyone who has any experience with trying to do that kind of work, it's not easy. So we saw in that clip that there was a particular reference to how there is a resistance to letting Jamil Al-Amin be interviewed at all and being heard from at all. So obviously we want to hear what it is you can share and can report about the I think you said there were more than one recent interviews that you've done with him, but I'd also like to hear however many you did do or are going to do, how it even came about and what that process was like.
Okay, so I guess maybe 4 years ago now, I decided that I wanted to write a biography of Imam Jamil, just because it seemed that you know, this is someone whose life is such a huge contribution to so many different movements. He's a pivotal figure in so many points in our history, going back to the 1960s, and yet he's been completely forgotten, right? And he's you know, like new generations haven't heard of him. So I thought, well, someone needs to do this. It doesn't seem like anyone else is, so I'm going to have a go. And I started doing research, and obviously, given that he is still alive, you know, if you're writing a book about a guy, you want to meet the guy and interview him. So I started doing you know, there's a formal process that you do with the Federal Bureau of Prisons if you want to interview someone who's in a federal prison, right? So I started doing that process and putting in the applications, and you know, they always came back and said no. So you know, I then kind of did you know, so one of the things about him is, as maybe you know, is that he was convicted in the Georgia state prison system, in Georgia state, and initially he was imprisoned in the Georgia state prison system, as you would expect if you were convicted in Georgia state, and then a few years after that he was transferred to federal custody, right? They accused him of radicalizing other Muslim prisoners, but you know, I've seen the analysis that the federal bureau did to justify that, and it doesn't stand up at all. But there was a way to get him out of there and get him into federal custody, and then he was incarcerated in ADX Florence in Colorado, in solitary confinement there for a number of years. And so when you're trying to interact with the prison authorities, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, one of the things they do is they consult with the Georgia state prison people, right? When they have to make a decision about him, they're expected to consult, because they're imprisoning him on behalf of Georgia state. So now in Georgia state has pretty strong laws on public access to official documents and information. So you can put in a kind of like a freedom of information request to Georgia state to find out what the Federal Bureau of Prisons has been saying to them. So I did that. So I get the correspondence, and I get the discussion about whether to allow interviews. So what it turns out is that after he was convicted back in 2002, you know, when that, because that was a big news story at the time, you got the big broadcasters wanting to do interviews with him, like CNN, you know, ABC, blah, blah, blah. And they were given permission to interview him just after he'd been convicted, right? And those, for reasons that I don't know, I don't understand, those interviews never took place. But then since then, no one's been allowed to interview him. Like every interview request that's been put in has been denied by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And the reasoning that comes through from the Georgia State correspondence with them is that he's considered a security risk. And so then, that's their term, security risk, right? So then your question is, well, security risk to who? Are you saying that I'm going to be in danger if I sit in a room with him? Are you saying that he's in danger from me? Where's the security risk, right? So what you have to understand is security risk for them means the security risk is him speaking to the public, right? Is the security risk. His words are the security risk, right? So, when you understand that, you're thinking, okay, well, possibly get some lawyers on this. Because that seems, at least at first glance, to be a violation of the First Amendment, right? So I tried to get lawyers involved. No one wanted to touch it. I did a petition. I got kind of 500 or so of the leading kind of academics who work in this field to sign a petition saying, the Federal Bureau of Prisons is acting wrongfully in denying anyone access to him because he is such a pivotal figure in this history. If he dies before we have a chance to really sit down with him and talk to him about that history, we're losing all that information about what happened in the civil rights movement, in the Black Power movement, and so forth, right? Big names in academia signed up to that, sent that to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. They come back a day later, sorry, no, we're not allowing it. So eventually I managed to get the First Amendment clinic at Cornell University Law School and at the Arizona State University Law School interested in doing this. And they did some work on it. And what they did is they drew up a legal argument. And then we wrote to the Federal Bureau of Prisons and said, right, we're going to judge right now. And we think we'll win unless you start negotiating to allow us to do an interview with him. And so that was kind of in January this year. And the legal argument essentially was, if you don't allow him to speak to the public, you are doing a kind of what they call viewpoint discrimination. In other words, you are discriminating against his particular beliefs, his ideology, and not allowing it to be freely expressed, right? Which has always been his argument about why he's not being allowed to speak, right? So the Federal Bureau of Prisons then came back soon afterwards and said, all right, we'll do it. We'll do a negotiation on how to make this happen. Obviously they must have understood that they were going to lose that case, and they didn't want to they didn't want it to go to court and actually set legal precedent. So they were like, we'll negotiate. So and this was in the middle of COVID, obviously. So then we said, all right, well, let's see about doing some video interviews to start with. And then maybe when COVID settles down a bit, we'll do the in-person interviews. So then in March and May, I did like phone and video interviews with him for, I guess I did 2 of those that were about an hour and a half each or so. And then in August, I was able to go to Tucson, Arizona and meet with him in person. And I spent 2 days there and did an hour and a half on each day of actually meeting with him and talking with him.
Wow. So just the quick stuff, like relatively speaking, how is he health wise, mentally, physically, how's he holding up?
Well, he's just before I met with him in person, he had finally had the very simple operation that he needed done on his eyes to deal with his cataracts. So in the I guess a year or so, maybe more before then, he was more or less blind as a result of the prison just simply refusing to do this very simple operation, that can be done to deal with cataracts. So I think, the pressure that those of us involved in around supporting him, the pressure that we've been putting on seemed to have finally had a result, and they did that. So he was able to see. And still had possibly some issues with the recovery around the operation that he just had. So he was wearing dark glasses. and he was used a walking frame to come to the interview room. So he's, you know, but given his age, you know, he's in his 70s, and given his circumstances, right, what has been done to him, you know, he's in remarkably good physical shape, and certainly mentally as sharp as ever. You know, like he was in solitary confinement for, what was it, 8 years or so, and the medical expertise on solitary confinement in those conditions says that, you know, after maybe a couple of months of that, you're looking at permanent mental health damage for a lot of people. For him, he seems to have found a way to survive that with his mental faculties fully intact. And if you've seen him speak in earlier periods in his life, that kind of flavor that he brings, the kind of perception, the energy, the intellectual capacity, all of that is as strong as ever, it seemed to me. He was able to range in our conversation across different decades. He had sharp recollection of you know, things that were happening in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. He was able to talk about you know, the Islamic tradition. He was able to talk about the Black radical tradition. He was able to, you know, move from Frantz Fanon to you know, other scholars. Somehow he had an opinion on Facebook, even though Facebook didn't exist when he was outside the prison system last. You know, an incredible conversation.
Right on.
What was some of the things that surprised you when you talked to him? And obviously you wanted to write on him, you wanted to interview him, so you had already done quite a bit of research, you know, and had known quite a bit about him as a subject. And yet sometimes when you get the real thing, there's still some surprise, you know, because at some point you kind of feel like you kind of have a grasp of what to expect. But what were some of the things that surprised you once you finally met him?
You know, a lot of people had talked about his generosity, and you know, that's one thing when people talk about it in the abstract, but to actually experience that, you know, like the dude's in a federal prison and he's asking me if there's anything he can do for me, you know, just those little things like that tell you that this is a kind of a special person. In terms of the history, you know, there's lots of things that he went into in his life that I think people don't know about, especially, or at least haven't been written about him. So I think maybe people who know him, or people who've grown up in that kind of world that he grew up in Louisiana in the 40s and 50s would know this stuff. But the stuff about him growing up and how he related to his mom and his dad, and the history around the African-American community there and the struggles there. I mean, that was something that I hadn't heard expressed in exactly that way. The idea that in dealing with white supremacist terrorist violence around that time, as a young kid growing up, it's not that you just learn to so the way most people I've heard talk about that is they say you learn to you know, what the limits are of what you can do. You learn those limits, right? Like looking at a white girl the wrong way can mean that you're going to get lynched, right? So you understand that from a very young age. Your parents have to tell you that from a very young age because of the Jim Crow system that you're growing up in. But what he talks about as well is how you also learn the gray area that you can play with, right? And how you want to get into that gray area and push the limits of what that freedom that you can have to just get away with a little more than you're supposed to before you start to put your life in danger, right? And for him, it's out of trying to maneuver in that gray area where you can start to tell some people to, you know, that you're not going to take what they're doing to you, but do it in a way that doesn't get you killed, right? Like you don't want to get killed. There's no heroism to being a martyr, but there's a space that you can operate within where you can just like start to begin to push back a little. And that for him was the roots of what later becomes, you know, the Black Power movement that he's a leader in, right? So that kind of stuff was interesting to me, and the way he expressed that was fresh to me. And then, you know, the other thing is he's funny, right? I mean, you know, one of the things
if you read his book, Die Nigger Die, that's like, I mean, it's so much comedy in that book. I mean, it's like ridiculous. Yeah.
Right. So, you know, one of the it's a slightly strange experience to be interviewing someone under these conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I've kind of interacted with him before this year a little bit through writing letters and so forth, and so we've had some kind of knowledge about each other and who we each are, but we don't really know each other, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so here we are sitting in this room. You know, we're in a federal prison. We're sitting in this room. I've negotiated through my lawyers so that there's no one else in the room. There's a prison guard out, you know, standing outside the door. But we've got to assume that we're not really in private, and we've got to assume that you know the audio recording that I'm making of our conversation could could be subpoenaed by a court and used potentially in any future legal actions. So we both know that, like, we're not really having a free conversation here anyway, right? Nevertheless, and so that
they're recording it anyway.
They're recording it anyway, right?
So they didn't need to subpoena you.
Right. So you know, like, for all those reasons, right? It's a very odd situation to be in, right? And we both can kind of sense that, right? And so his ability to kind of humor that part of it was really, you know, was pretty amazing, considering everything that he's been through. And you know, and obviously I'm, you know, my part of what I'm doing is trying to you know, the blanks in the story of his life are the blanks around the stuff he was doing, that would be, you know, from the government's point of view, potentially stuff that would involve criminal prosecutions, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and not just for him, but for other people that he was with, even, you know, going back some time to the 60s, 70s, right? And so, you know, and we both understand that, but I still want to be able to write about that sort of stuff if I can do it in a way that's safe for everyone. But you know, so some of the you know, humor was precisely around those moments where I'm trying to see what I can find out, and he's understanding that you know, there's certain things that he's not going to be able to talk about, because there's still people around who might be at risk of some action if he did share that information, right? So, you know, things like that, to navigate that with humor is pretty impressive.
What about just real quick, just a follow up on that, in terms of painting in some of the gray areas around his life. You know, you mentioned he's from Louisiana. Huey's people were from Louisiana as well, and a lot of times when we hear about these people, we think they're presented to us. Speaking of narratives, they're presented as if they just kind of fell down from outer space, just and existed in a vacuum, and they didn't have any kind of, you know, there was no kind of in vitro period, if so to speak. There's no, you know, Huey's people were people that fought, you know, as well. He came from a lineage of people that fought back in Louisiana, so they understood very well what, you know, how to. So that pretty much shaped him and molded him. Did you find anything in terms of the upbringing of Jamil as Hubert Brown coming up in Louisiana? You know, that could be similar.
Right. So, you know, so it's a mixture of things here, right? So his relationship with his father is interesting to me, right? Like, so his father is someone who was actively involved. This is something I just learned this year, right? Was someone who was actively involved in the Baton Rouge bus boycott, right? Now, the Baton Rouge bus boycott back in the 50s was like, you know, we all heard about the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott. But the Baton Rouge bus boycott was an earlier precursor to that you know, did the same kind of thing of the community coming together to set up their own alternative transport system so that the boycott could take place of the segregated transport system, while everyone in the African American community could still, you know, get to their jobs and get about their business and so forth, right? So it requires this huge community involvement. Everyone needs to step up. Anyone who's got a car needs to share that vehicle as part of that, of creating that alternative infrastructure, right? It's a huge logistical operation, right? So Jamil Al-Amin's father was involved in that, right? He was, you know, he worked for Standard Oil, so he was the kind of guy who had a regular income, you know, a job with benefits and so forth, and had a car that could, you know, and so he becomes someone involved in that. Now, did that influence Hubert Brown growing up? Yeah, it must have done, right? It must have done. But also it influences him to want to go beyond that, right? And here's the key, because when he talks about his father, you know, this is one of those moments where there's a phrase that he has that sums up a whole structure of how to understand something, right?
He had a way of doing that.
Yeah. So you say to him, how, you know, who was your father? And he's like, he was a good American. Right. Sums it up, right? The guy was, you know, he was in the military in World War II. He's got this job for, you know, as working for a corporation. He wants to set limits on what the movement, he wants to be, he's willing to be involved in the movement, but he wants to set limits on where it goes as well, right? And that's what, you know, Hubert Brown growing up wants to go beyond that, right? And so in that dynamic between him and his father, in a way, is a microcosm of the dynamic through the 60s of you know, the differences around where the movement's going to go between the more conservative elements around the churches and the more radical elements that want to push in the direction of black power, right? So, you know, that's one thing. But this is, you know, I mean, he's got family all around Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, right? He's going back and forth between those different states as he's coming up. You know, so you know, Emmett Till is a huge thing, right? When that happens, because you know, it means that he's not safe to go to visit family that he was previously visiting regularly. So things like that, you know, shape him. Those struggles around that kind of lynching violence shape him. But it's, you know, it can go much further back, right? So, and this is something that came out through me talking to Jamil Al-Amin's wife, Karima Al-Amin, and you know, so soon after they together from 1967, soon afterwards, you know, H. Rap Brown, as he then is basically trying to evade capture by the government, right? And he's disappeared, and he's on the FBI's, you know, they add a place on the FBI's 10 most wanted list just for him, right? And they don't know where he is. This is 1970, 1971. So Karima Al-Amin becomes someone who is Lynn Doswell, as she was at the time, becomes someone who is being tracked by the government all the time, right? And because they think if we want to find him, let's start with, you know, following his wife around, and she's able to evade. You know, she and the rest of her family create a system of avoiding surveillance, of kind of counter surveillance. Like, they're keeping records of like different faces of FBI agents. They're figuring out like how you can get in and out of the country without being tracked and so forth, right? So we're doing all this. So I said to her, like, this is kind of like spycraft stuff, right? How do you know how to do all this stuff? And she's like, we've been doing it for centuries, right? We've been running from the Klan. Like, her ancestors had fled from the Klan to Canada because of the stuff they were doing, right? So, you know, this is, you know, and obviously when you look at the fact that the laws that they're using to try and track and prosecute Rap Brown in 67 are essentially derived from the fugitive slave laws. The connections running back to centuries are all there. you know, and as he's saying it himself at the time, what you're seeing in 67 with the uprisings in US cities in 67 is not a revolution, it's slave rebellion, right? That's what he's saying. It's like the first stage of a revolution, what might become a revolution. It's slave rebellions.
So just a couple things, and forgive me if you said this and I just didn't catch it or missed it. Just a couple things. His legal status, or where is he with his legal status? As we saw in that introductory sort of video clip, that someone is well on the record of having confessed to this crime he's been accused of, on and on and on. So can you update us on anything about that? And then the other part of it is what are the specific outcomes? So these interviews are for a book. Are you doing anything else with, for instance, the audio and video? So I'll stop there with those two, just his legal update, and then just clarity on all that's coming from these interviews.
So Kyrie Al-Amin, Jamil Al-Amin's son, laid out for you really clearly, I think, the kind of the what was going on in the trial that's led to his current conviction. The legal process here is that he's done the appeals process that is available to you through the courts. That has, so it got where that ended. What was it? Maybe 1 or 2 years ago now. Was that the court recognized that the trial was flawed, right? So constitutionally flawed, particularly around the fact that the judge gave instructions to the jury that the judge was not allowed to do constitutionally, right? So there's a higher court recognition that the trial was flawed, but at the same time, those judges said, if the trial had happened in the correct way, he'd still have been convicted by a jury, right? And so they didn't overturn the conviction, right? So whatever, whatever you want to make of that. But
that's like that OJ book, if I did do it,
if I did it,
but if I did it,
it is, yeah.
So they're like,
exactly.
If you did it, we're going to punish you as if you did it, even if you probably didn't, and our initial trial was flawed. But if you did it, we're going to punish you like if you did it.
U.S. jurisprudence.
Right. So the legal process of going through the courts to overturn the conviction through the appeal, as I understand it, is exhausted, right? And I got to just put in the warning that I'm not a lawyer, so there might be others who could correct me on that, but that's my understanding of it. And then there is simultaneously now there is also another process, which is an agency that's been established in Atlanta to review legacy miscarriages of justice, right? And Jamil Al-Amin's case is being considered by that agency. So that's out of the prosecutor's office down there in Fulton County in Georgia. That's not a legal process where you can have a hearing or anything. It's simply you submit something on paper and those people look at it. Now, if that so they are looking at it, and if they find that the case doesn't stand up, that can then lead to if I've understood the law here correctly, it doesn't lead to an acquittal, but it can lead to a release. Okay, so we're waiting on the outcome of that, and we're perhaps a bit more optimistic than we would have been a year or so back, because the new DA down there seems to be more sympathetic to it. But we'll have to wait and see. I mean, the case, I think the case is is one where what you think about it, I mean, it boils down to what you think about the possibility of the government framing someone, right? That, in a way, that's what it boils down to. And if you think that that's just never going to happen, you're going to think he did it. And if you think that can happen quite a lot, especially to someone like Jamil Al-Amin, you're gonna put the pieces together and figure out that this was a wrongful conviction. So that's the dilemma with this case is it tests where you stand on your understanding of the American system.
Yeah, I don't remember. I have to admit, I don't remember all the details of the case, but I remember thinking how wild it is that something that is supposed to have happened, if it was supposed to have been broad daylight with multiple police officers involved, right? So I mean, how in shootings, so it's like, how does somebody shoot, get shot?
And the guy that did it, who admitted it several times that he did it,
but I'm saying, but even before that, my point was, even before we get to all of that, I was already, how does all of this happen? And then there's still a dispute. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, either you did it and you have different reasons for doing it than are being claimed, or you didn't do it at all. But how in the hell are like, that's where I was starting with. I remember when this initially is said to have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Never mind all that has gone on since, and never mind what I would have thought about the chances of the state setting him up, to begin with. But I mean, so anyway, that's why
but there's one detail in the case that to me is kind of really striking, right? So the detail is, so there's a shootout on the street, right? And there's one guy in a shootout with two police officers, right? One of whom's killed and the other survives. The surviving officer testifies that the identification that the officer does has the shooter as I forget the exact height, but it's at least 6 inches shorter than
like 5'9".
I mean, but and here's the most interesting thing, right? Color of eyes is gray, right? So not the same color as Jamil Al-Amin's eyes, right? Which are dark. So the identification evidence doesn't match. Now, okay, so if you want to, from the prosecution's point of view, you can say, okay, well, this is a tense moment. Maybe he remembered it wrong. Fine, right? What you then find out is in the police files for Jamil Al-Amin that were created before this incident, the identification description is that exact height that the guy comes out with, and that eye color, right? So for some reason, the police, in their incompetence, had a bad identification file on him, but that's the identification file that this officer clearly must have gone to prepare his testimony.
Wow.
Right? So right there, you're like, okay, so that recollection, the identification evidence right there is not his actual spontaneous recollection that he writes
like
down
the kid that
after the incident. It's something that's been fabricated and constructed after the incident, right? So now, what is the prosecution's best case now? Once just from that fact alone, among dozens of facts that look like that, right? The best case the prosecution can make now is the surviving officer fabricated his identification evidence, but nevertheless, the person he's identified is still the guy you're saying he is, right? It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. So
it's like the guy. I mean, it is like the kid in class that gets caught cheating because he cheated off somebody who got it wrong.
Right. Exactly.
It's like you didn't even cheat off somebody who got the right answer.
Right. Exactly. It's exactly.
You both got it exactly wrong the same way.
Right.
That's how you get caught.
Right.
That's how it worked in elementary school. I mean, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh my
God. And remind us who the jury was in that trial, who ignored all of these facts that you just laid out.
Well, no, it's not. I mean, so part of what's going on in the trial is that the is that these facts are not being allowed to be brought in, right?
Right.
So the jury, you know, what's happening with the jury is that they're not getting to hear that fact. They're not getting to hear the testimony from an Alabama law enforcement officer who is on the record saying that he felt like the gun had been planted, like the gun that they claim to have found near when they captured Jamil Al-Amin, and that then, you know, they use that. I mean, that's a key piece of evidence. You know, Alabama officer says when he saw that gun there, he thought that was planted. It wasn't just dropped in a chase, right? I don't hear that. I don't hear. I mean, the whole defense. I mean, the part of the problem was that we didn't have a movement defense. It wasn't like there was like a load of activists and organizers saying let's rally round and you know, highlight what's happening in this trial and try and bring attention to it. It was done in the months after 9/11. You know, here you have a leading American Muslim on trial. It kind of got forgotten by all of us, right? And so the defense lawyers didn't do the best job because they didn't have that, you know, that kind of pressure on them from a movement around them. The jury did not get to hear the defense argument, right? The defense argument should have been, understand who this guy is, first of all, right? Understand that the government has been trying to get him convicted of something or other since 1967, if not earlier, right? Like, understand what COINTELPRO is. Understand that is something that runs right through to the present day. And he's one of the people that was named as one of the 5 targets in the famous 1967 memo from J. Edgar Hoover, right? So understand all that. Understand that earlier in the 90s, there was an attempt to get a conviction on him that collapsed immediately, right? And then look at the evidence of framing things like what I just said about the identification evidence, things like this officer who says he thought the gun was planted, you know, etc., etc. Understand that there's a strange FBI involvement in this case, right? Which on paper, you know, in terms of the way the prosecution presents it, it's simply, you know, like a guy involved in a shootout out of any no context to it, right? No context to it. There's no apparent motive. It's just this guy's crazy and he loses it and he shoots at police officers, right? For no apparent other reason. But understand that there's an FBI involvement in this case. You know, the FBI officer is present when he's arrested, right? And tries to kill him right there, right? So, you know, so why is the FBI involved in this, right? So once you start putting all those pieces together, you've got certainly for any, I mean, you know, then a good jury is going to say reasonable doubt, right? If not even convinced by the argument that there's a framing thing going on. There's reasonable doubt, right? But the jury wasn't allowed to see all that evidence. And you know, I think if I remember right, it was a majority black jury. It was certainly there's enough black people on there to prevent you know, a kind of you know, it wouldn't have been a unanimous verdict if it was just, you know, because you depended on some black people on that jury to agree with the verdict, right? But they didn't have the evidence presented to them. What they you know, the prosecutors understood that there was enough questions about the prosecution that they couldn't go for the death penalty, right? So they went to, you know, they had that option, but they didn't do that because they thought that might not get if the death penalty was on the table, the jury might not go for it. But if all the evidence had been presented in a coherent way with a strong defense argument in the way I just outlined, I think the verdict would have been different.
Well, you say you're not a lawyer, but I think if had you been able to represent him with the facts that you presented today, I think you would have done a pretty decent job. And you talk about how the jury wasn't privy to the information. Certainly in the court of public opinion, I think, you know, we have to consider, like what you said, that 9/11 had just happened. He's a Muslim now, and back then he was a Black Panther. And I can remember the news coverage was always, you know, they always got to reiterate the former Black Panther, and they show all of his fiery speeches and shot a police officer. So it just kind of like just through all of this, you know, quote unquote evidence that's circumstantial.
And it was also
in the
that
court of public opinion, he was already guilty. I'm sorry.
And also in the context of his life, he was only a Panther for 6 months or whatever, and
didn't even matter.
Imam for 20 years. But they kept
matter.
going back to that Panther
exactly.
thing. But Arun, before you respond, I did want to ask. So please fold this in. I did want to ask about that. The specific specific combination of the Black radicalism and the Islam.
Right.
How does that particular combination come to play both in his life and in the treatment he's been getting?
Yeah. So I mean, on the Panther thing, you're right. All the news coverage at the time was presenting it like that, right? That former Black Panther, right? And their narrative was, well, of course Panthers kill cops, right? That's what they were about, right? So firstly, that's not what the Panthers were about. Secondly, actually, Jamil Al-Amin was never a Panther, right? He was never actually a member of the Black Panther Party. He was appointed briefly as the Minister of Justice for the Black Panther Party as a kind of honorary position, but he was not a member of the Panther. So even just as a matter of historical record, those descriptions of him as a Panther weren't right. This is one of the most interesting things about his life, Jared, that you raised about how his history as a leader of the Black Power movement in the late 60s then is followed by this, it's actually a much longer period of him as an imam and as one of America's leading a Muslim leader in the United States, right? So there's a lot of, so for a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but for some of the people who were his comrades in the late 60s, 1970, 1971, his conversion to Islam when he was in the New York prison system in 1971, his conversion to Islam was, they read it as somehow giving up on a true revolutionary position, right, and somehow becoming more conservative, and then they come up with kind of armchair psychological explanations for why he did it, like he was scared in prison, blah blah blah, and none of those seem plausible to me. Then there's a lot of people who've got to know him since then through a relationship to him as a Muslim, and who consider the part of his life before 1971, when he wasn't a Muslim, as somehow just like a less interesting or even corrupt. So both of those ways of looking at his life seem to me wrong. What I'm interested in is the through lines, right? And what's interesting to me is how many of those through lines there are. What Islam seems to offer him from 1971 onwards is another way of trying to think about the revolution, right? And his take is that the revolution that he was interested in, through 67 to 71, failed because it lacked a spiritual core. And Islam, he feels, is a revolutionary ideology that gives him a spirit that has the advantage over other revolutionary ideologies of having a spiritual core to it. It tells you what it means to be human, and what your obligations are to other human beings in a way that he feels wasn't available within the civil rights and Black Power movements in the same way, right? Okay, so that's his take. Now, here's what's interesting to me is if you look at the work he does pre-1971 and after 1971 when he converts, a lot of it is very similar, right? So even though the ideology that he is using to make sense of what he's doing is different, the work is in some ways is a lot of overlaps, right? So what's he doing in 1971 when he's arrested in 1971? He's involved in he's come to the conclusion at that point that the key political question for Black people especially in somewhere like New York City where he's based is the question of drugs, right? And so he's saying that the influx of drugs, is a result of government interventions, right? Like the government are involved. You know, this is kind of blowback from Vietnam, where the CIA have been involved in the heroin business in Southeast Asia. Then there's blowback of that heroin into the United States with the government enabling it, dumping it on Black communities, right? As a way to pacify Black communities, and that is happening in a kind of in a way where the NYPD is obviously getting paid off and profiting from that kind of business, right? So his political analysis at the time is that the revolutionaries like him need to drive out drugs from the Black community, and that's what he's trying to do while he's underground in 71. That's what leads to his arrest in 71 in New York City. What does he do, through the 80s and 90s in Atlanta when he's organizing in the Black community there? From an Islamic perspective, try and drive out the drugs from the community, right? He understands again that the drugs are there in part because of collusion between local criminal organizations and law enforcement agencies, right? So there's a through line, and there's many others as well that we can point to. But that's what's interesting to me is how his what he's actually doing on the ground, the kind of organizing he's doing on the ground is often the same, whether it's done with a kind of Black power perspective or an Islamic perspective.
Right on. Listen, fellas, I know we're coming up at the end of this hour here. I just want to, time check and make sure we get any last comments or questions in. Anything that I know I was asking specifically what's going to happen with the audio and the video. Is there going to something accompanying what you're going to write? Kaba, if there's something else you want to ask in the room, please. If there's anything we didn't lead you to say or invite you to say that you want to say, please add that as well.
Okay, yeah. So the arrangement that those interviews were done on was that they were solely for the purpose of my writing the book. Like that was part of the negotiation. I haven't done video recordings. I wasn't allowed to. I did audio recordings. We'll try and find a way to use those audio recordings one way or another. But I don't know what form that's going to be in right now. The final thing to say is, there are things that people can do to support the campaign for his release, to support the campaign to get him moved. It seems like the reason he's in the federal prison in Tucson, Arizona, is because it's like as far away as possible from Georgia. We want to get him back to nearer to Georgia, where his community is, where his family is, right? So there's things that people can do to try and push on all those things. So please go to the Imam Jamil Action Network website, or find it on Facebook, wherever. But please do what you can to get involved in supporting that.
Absolutely, we'll link that in the video in the show notes as well. Just if that helps anyone. Hey, Kaba, did you have any last quick anything before we wrap up?
I think that was a good way to end, is just to make sure people get the word on how to support. So I appreciate the time.
No, absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. No, anytime. Thank you for the work and appreciate you coming on. Take good care.
And I've been to Cambridge too. It's not as bad as you say. Cambridge.
It's a very pretty town.
It's a very pretty town. Yeah.
Arun Kundani, thank you very much for coming through. Appreciate you.
Take care. Thank you.
All right. You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye. Peace. All right, good people. Definitely thanks to Arun and Brother Kaba, to you as well, and to all those in the chat and the audience. Appreciate you. Those who will see this later, thanks to you as well. And definitely check the show notes for the link, or find the link on your own and find ways to support Brother Jamil Al-Amin and all the other political prisoners that we want to continue to lift up here on this program and on this channel. So, Brother Kaba, quickly, anything about your show Monday past or Monday coming on WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C.?
Well, yeah, last week we did basically it was a Labor Day show, so I was supposed to mainly just have a labor type theme. So I played some songs, and I even played W4. I did have to edit it, and I played it on the radio.
Yeah.
And I also got a call off the air from another brother that you might know. Speaking of Jamil's, his name is Brother Jamil. He called in as well and shouted out the show. He appreciated the listen. So your blood brother Jamil called in.
That's it.
It's always good to hear him. He's also a programmer on WPLW. This week, though, we're going to be talking about, there's a John Coltrane tribute that's annual. It's going to be coming next Friday, and we're going to talk about that. Also going to be talking to some of the folks that we had on a couple of weeks ago. Was that last week? It seemed like the days just running to each other.
Yeah.
About Russell Maroon Schultz. We're going to have them on. And then I'm also going to have the aforementioned show where we're going to talk about COVID from another perspective, dealing with a doctor who's going to be covering that, and also getting past all of the misinformation, since we talked a lot about how the government lies and stuff about ivermectin, and how for some reason people keep acting like ivermectin hasn't been around for 40 years, how ivermectin had won Nobel Prize in 2014, and people have been using ivermectin for a while, and there are different types of ivermectin, but for some reason the media keeps pushing this narrative as if it's a dewormer and that's all that it is, and that it doesn't have various uses. That and other things we'll be talking about around this narrative around COVID. So that'll be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
I'm sure you will, Dr. Ball.
Yeah.
Please.
Oh my goodness, I'm gonna definitely check it out. But anyway, we're just not going to agree on that, man. And I don't, and not even about the ivermectin stuff, but it's being suggested as an option or a treatment. I don't. Anyway, but whatever. Okay, look, I don't want to do that.
It's one of many. It's one of many. It's not just the only one. It's one of many.
I hope people look at that carefully, man.
Ask Joe Rogan. You know,
that's my point. That's not a source, man.
No, but here's the thing:
it's not a source, man.
Look, we don't have to like him. We don't have to like everything about him. But the fact that he used treatment, he used treatments that were not shots, and he got over it within a day or two, and he's not alone. It shows that there are alternative methods to treating outside of big pharma, which has been shown.
No, it doesn't show that. It doesn't show that. No, it doesn't. That's the point. And going back to where I started with the whole point about science and 9/11, you're having him. That is a specific singular test.
I just use that as a.
Hold on,
I use it, but he's not. But he represents quite a few.
What he. No, but what he did, hold on now, listen. What he did has not been replicated on others to show that, no, it hasn't, because what he did, if you look at even what he said he did, first of all, he's a very specific individual with already a particular health condition. He said he threw the kitchen sink at his illness. So my point is, the regimen that he took, the path he took to become healthy, is not something that has been replicated scientifically in the way that billions of vaccines have. So to equate the two is, again, not scientific. Is going back to what the only reason said earlier, is not doing science. It's not that it's bad science. It's not science.
The only reason that it hasn't been replicated is because it's not allowed. It hasn't been allowed by the FDA.
Okay,
but that's the only reason it hasn't been replicated.
The FDA, hold on, the FDA cannot stop scientific data from being collected. Hold on, the FDA cannot stop testing. But that's missing.
But it has been tested. That's the point. It has been tested over 40 years.
No, first of all, it can't be.
In treating
listen to what I'm
viruses.
saying. Not in treating COVID. And what Joe Rogan did has not been scientifically replicated to be seen as something that could be put up against billions of vaccines that have been put out successfully with 90% rates. By the way, even studies showing, I would add this, 73, I saw one study that said 73% of those who are vegan and vaccinated or veganism. Actually, let me back that up. Veganism has had positive impact. Let me just leave that alone.
Yeah,
but my point is the scientific replication The data, the scientific method has been applied to vaccines where it has not been
To
applied
vaccines, yes, to vaccines, but
this
not,
vaccine.
but not this particular vaccine. The long-term effects have not been shown to be proven.
Well, clearly you can't make that, but clearly that would have to be
But
applied to
ivermectin.
Hold on. You cannot say that there are no long-term negative ill effects of ivermectin. That has not been shown, nor has it been shown to have success against COVID and not to have long-term. So the same claim you're making against vaccines can be easily with more validity applied to ivermectin.
Well, again, I
and
go
whatever
back,
Joe Rogan is said to have done.
I go back to my initial conversation around this, and that is that 99% of the people, 99.6% of the people who get COVID recover, actually survive. 82% fully recover. So our immune systems, number one, if we can, it's all about strengthening it. That's why these so-called breakthrough cases, which basically mean that the vaccines are not really working because people are still getting it, even though they have a vaccine. If you have a vaccine,
that's not what the vaccine. Again, the vaccine is not supposed to prevent you from getting it. It's supposed to prevent you from having the hospitalization and death, and those rates are well over 90%.
But we're seeing that now in places like Israel, where most of the population is vaccinated, and they're having all kinds of issues with it right now, and it's only just the beginning. So I'm just simply saying that there are
alternatives. Look at what's happening to people who are not vaccinated. Look at
those are people who have preconditions.
That's not true.
That's the people that have preconditions.
That's absolutely not true.
Most of the people that die, brother Jared, most of the people that die have preconditions. They have preconditions.
They also are unvaccinated. And
most of the
people who are dying are not vaccinated. That's the point of the vaccine. Not that you won't get it, not that it won't make you sick, but that it'll be less likely to transmit and you'll be less likely to die. That is the scientifically proven data at this point.
There are people who are dying with the vaccine. There are people who are, and
those numbers are
and
those
and they are underreported,
less than 1%,
and they are underreported.
We're talking about the
people that are dying with the vaccine.
Well, I mean, that hasn't been proven. There's no data. I haven't seen the science that supports that argument.
You're not going to see it because mainstream media, even if you put that out.
But that's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for the mainstream media is not my source. I don't look at the mainstream media. What I'm saying is,
even if you put, you can't even mention these things without, being censored by YouTube, by the media, by the internet.
That is not an argument that proves your argument of against vaccination.
My main argument is if you want to get the vaccine, you can get the vaccine. My main argument is that is not the only. My main argument is that vaccines are not the only treatment for viruses. They never have been the only treatment for viruses. And on top of it, you
proven to be the best defense, but when you talk about this virus.
But when people are trying to mandate everybody, even people who have had COVID, to get the vaccine, even though since you talk about science, over 100 years of science has proven that most people who've gotten a virus are pretty much immune to it. And it has been shown that they are 6 to 13 times more immune than people who get the vaccine. And yet people who have had the virus and are 6 to 13 times more protected are still being mandated to get the vaccine. There's a push to get these vaccines out because there's money in it. And before, there was no money in vaccines. And that's the point. That's one of the main points I'm making as well. So it's not that people, I'm not telling people don't get the vaccine. If you feel comfortable getting the vaccine, yes, it has shown thus far that it has helped some people.
Overwhelmingly.
Saying,
some people overwhelmingly, Kaba. You can't say to some people
whatever.
Well over 90%.
Whatever.
Over 90%.
Okay, fine.
You can't just say some people.
my point is also scientific, that 99.6% of the people who get the vaccine survive, and 82% of the people who get this vaccine fully recover without taking anything. I'm not saying don't take anything. I'm saying, yes, if you wear the mask, socially distance, I'm saying that you need to try to address.
Misspoke the accurate situation.
No. If you look at right now, I advise people go to the CDC website right now, look at the number of cases, and then look at the number of deaths, and you will find that 99.6% of the people who get the virus survive the virus. That was even before the vaccine. That is a fact. 82% of the people who had the virus fully recover. That is a fact. That is not me making it up, and anyone can look that up. That's all I'm saying. But again, we agree to disagree.
We do.
All I'm saying is that if you get the vaccine, that's fine. What I'm saying is that's not the only way to survive this virus. That's all.
It's just overwhelmingly the best proven way. That's all. That's all I'm saying. It's overwhelmingly the best proven way, and everything else is
the best proven way. The best proven way is your own immune system. Your own immune system. Again, not almost 100% of the case.
That's actually not factual. That's not factual.
Brother,
because that's why the people who are dying
pull up the CDC website right now.
Kaba.
Pull up the CDC.
Point.
Pull up the CDC website.
The immune system by itself.
My brother, look at the CDC website. Look at the number of people who've died versus the people who've gotten it.
You're
do the math, and you will see
I'm
that
talking
most
about
people's
do
immune
the math
systems
on
win.
Kabab. Instead of interrupting me and cutting me off, do the math on the people who have died from COVID.
I got cut
overwhelmingly, they have been unvaccinated versus those who have survived are overwhelmingly vaccinated,
and with compromised immune systems. So the key to
that's not factual. What you keep interrupting me and cutting me off and adding on to say to add a non-fact.
Okay,
the fact of what I'm saying is it is not based on underlying or pre-existing conditions. The fact is overwhelmingly the people. Okay, all right. Overwhelmingly, the data is clear. No. The data is clear. The people who are dying, it's not from it's not just underlying conditions, because those same people with underlying conditions who are vaccinated are not dying. So it is the lack of vaccine and whatever else is going on, including those without pre-existing conditions. Those who are unvaccinated are the ones who are dying, including why Cedric Ceballos is currently clinging to his own life right now. It is not just pre-existing conditions. It is lack of vaccine. So you can say what you want about the CDC numbers, but the point is, out of the people who are dying, it is overwhelmingly those without the vaccine. That is the fact. So,
and what I'm saying is that those
you've already said what you're saying,
is
and you keep
there are
adding
other
non-facts.
But you keep repeating the same thing. That's a non-fact, my brother. The point
what did I
is
say
that
that's not. Wait. What non-fact did I? What non-fact did I say?
Okay,
what non-fact did I say?
You said that the people who are dying are the people who are the vaccine. What I'm saying is that they do have. That most of them have had preconditions,
but they also don't have the vaccine. But the issue is they don't have the vaccine.
They have compromised immune systems. And what I'm saying
they don't
is that
have the vaccine because the people with the vaccine
I get cut off as well.
Dying.
I get cut off as well.
You're interrupting me and cutting me off to say a non-fact.
You just asked me a question. I was answering the question.
No.
And now you're cutting me off.
Kaba, I asked you to tell me what was the non-fact, and then you stated what I said, but what I said, which is a fact.
It is not.
So I have not stated a non-fact.
It is not.
What is a fact? What is a non-fact?
I said that most of those people have preconditions. You said we disagree on that, but that is a fact.
They don't have the vaccine.
They don't have the vaccine. And what I'm saying, the point I was going to make after that is that there are other treatments outside of vaccines that have been shown to help people recover
they have not
from the
been
vaccine.
Shown at the level of the vaccine. My point
because
is
they have not been tested. If you don't have a big sample size, and of course you're not going to have
the same level. That the vaccine is flawed
because it's not going to be allowed by the powers that be in order to be even seen. That they're suppressing the information, and then they're misrepresenting the information around things like ivermectin.
But you started off by saying ivermectin and Joe Rogan as an example. And what I'm saying is that method has not been proven.
I'm not simply saying Joe Rogan. I just use him as a singular example. I'm talking about ivermectin.
That's
in
my
general,
point. As a singular example, that is not a data set.
A singular example that many people have used over time.
Not as many as the billions with vaccine.
We've gone around in circles. I already said.
But I know, but you just went back and repeated.
But viruses
they have not been,
viruses are different,
virus,
but the ways in which people treat them have not been different. The ways that science have approached vaccines have not been different, except in this particular case for some reason, and that is because they are getting billions of dollars, and they cannot be sued, and you cannot sue them for malpractice. That is a fact. That is a fact.
No, what the fact is, no, it's not a fact. What the fact is
you can't. So you saying that you can sue them?
Hold on. Let me finish.
You saying you can sue them?
No. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
You're cutting me off. You started with
we cutting each other off. I think we both equal opportunity in that.
You started with the non-fact, and then I am going to end it here. So I'm going to have the last word. I'm just going to take
it's your show,
I gotta go because I gotta go. Right.
Okay.
But you started with the statement that a new process has been engaged, and as I said, with the round table of doctors and experts, they said the only thing that has been different about this process is the speed with which they went through the same standard process that they have always engaged. That is the only difference in terms of the development of the vaccine and demonstrating its effectiveness, which at this point, with billions of people surviving, being shown to survive, has shown to be successful and accurate. Your point about not being able to sue the other stuff, I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing the capitalist incentive. We already discussed that with those doctors as well, trying to get us back to work. I'm against all of that as well. But the argument that the vaccine is not successful in preventing death and hospitalization from COVID and in reducing its transmission is simply is not factual. And arguing that these other options are equally proven to the vaccine is simply not provable, even if you're right that the tests are not being allowed. And on that note, we're going to wrap it up. I say peace if you're willing to fight for it.
I'm willing to fight for it. We're both willing to fight for it, brother. Peace after revolution.
The rest of you, as Brother Kaba, are going to be relegated to.
Put it in the comments.
Catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like, everybody. Oh boy.
I love you.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What I like, what I like.